Fresh Air Production.
Everybody wants a podcast these days, don't they? It's a brilliant way to tell nuanced stories, build thought leadership, and create a community of listeners. Lovely content for your network, something to post on LinkedIn, etc. But how hard is it? Why should you bother? How do you tell if it's worked? And what's the process? That's what we do here. So welcome to Fresh Ears from Fresh Air Production. I'm Neil Cowling, the founder of Fresh Air, and in this programme, we dissect a branded podcast with the client, the producer, and anyone else involved. So far, we've discussed our projects for AQA, our true crime series for Slater and Gordon, the intimate conversations for Happyful magazine, and our effort to bring down the 21st century's most powerful dictator, Vladimir Putin. That, by the way, is still a work in progress. This week, it's all about a series made by our good friends at Propeller Group. It's called The Dog and Bone.
At our best, we can help brands really reinvent themselves for a new generation or for a new audience or for a new world that we find ourselves in.
That's right, and I think it is, sometimes that is about, as you say, turnaround, but sometimes that's about how you keep consistently growing a brand year after year. And I think, again, when you think of a brand like, it's a BBH song, but on Audi, you know, it's a Vorsprung technique guiding it. But if you look at the actual tone and sort of dialogue of a lot of the work, it's changed a lot.
So how do you build thought leadership in the marketing and PR industries and demonstrate your expertise with a podcast? Joining me to talk this through are Martin Loat, the chairman of Propeller Group, and Branwell Johnson, the director of content at Propeller. And, well, as a sign of how long we've been working together, there's no actual additional producer to introduce here because the producer was me. So hopefully I'll have a bit of insight on the process too. Martin and Branwell, welcome along to Fresh Ears. Let's start with Branwell. Bit of an introduction to Propeller Group, actually, please. Can you explain what you do for those who haven't heard of you?
Hi, Neil. Propeller Group's is a specialist agency. We do public relations, which is far more than sending out just a press release, as some people might think. We produce content in a wide variety of formats, and we do business development, which is very granular projects at getting business conversations going and trying to help our clients actually seal business deals. And we provide those services across a whole range of clients, many in the marketing services industry, which includes digital agencies and creative agencies and media agencies. We provide those services too for many in what we're going to call retail technology and e-commerce, which is basically online shopping and all the surrounding infrastructure that needs to be supported. And also we have a number of clients in fintech or financial technology as well.
So as I said, we've been working together for a long time, and the Dog and Bone in many ways is what Fresh Ears is to Fresh Air. This is about talking to our clients. It's about demonstrating a bit about what we do. It's about talking through the process, giving insight to the listenership. Why did you end up at a podcast? Because this is about, 3 years ago since we started talking about Dog and Bone?
Two reasons. The first, and the most important to me, is we had to learn about podcasts because it's a service we wanted to offer our clients, the production of a podcast. So no better way of learning than doing. So we rolled up our sleeves, got stuck in with your help, and created a podcast for ourselves, featuring people we know, talking about the topics and the issues that we know are important to the main audience we want to serve. And then with those lessons learned, we were able to go out and start trying to introduce our clients to the concept of producing their own podcasts too. And the other reason, of course, is just to build our own fame as well, our own brand, get it out there in the marketplace. A podcast that we produced gets talked about, gets shared, we get associated with the kind of very senior guests that we try and attract. So it's a big kind of halo effect for us too, to produce a podcast.
So Martin, a quick summary of the format really, and how you came up with it. Why originally the Dog and Bone was called the Dog and Bone because it was going to be on the phone, wasn't it?
Yeah, Dog and Bone, Cockney rhyming slang for phone. When we had the idea that we wanted to have our own podcast for the reasons that Branwell described, we realised that we did want to get some quite senior guests, certainly from our world of media advertising, marketing, retail and related technology, as Branwell described. And a lot of them are very, very busy. They're not professionally publicising any story, and getting them across town to a studio in the days when people used to go into London to work, if you remember those, was a bit of a challenge. So we kind of hedged our bets and thought, well, some of them might be on the phone. So we thought, well, maybe the podcast could start off as a phone call between two senior people who kind of know each other, almost like catching up on what happened to them that week or that month. And so we called it the Dog and Bone as a code for a phone, so that if we needed it to be a phone call, we'd sort of pre-described why that should be. As it happened, we picked up a bit of momentum, and with your help and brilliant expertise in the studios that we used, we were able to start to attract people to come into the studio in the middle of London. And so we realised after a few, and it's been an evolution, that we could dial down the kind of phone call aspect and actually make it a studio delivered conversation between two people. The reason we had the two people type of format, certainly at the beginning, was being the humble souls that we are. We knew that not that many people really wanted to hear what Propeller or its people had to say. They're much more interested in what some of our senior guests. I mean, the very first podcast, we had the chief exec of TSB Bank at the time, and gave a very good interview with a board director of Reach PLC newspapers who he worked with at the time. So the idea was to get two really senior people chatting together, because they could add more value for our listeners than we could ourselves.
And that is, you hinted at it just now, it's quite distinctive, because there are a lot of podcasts within the marketing industry, and within any industry really, where they're just talking about the industry. You could have done a weekly podcast about the latest news in marketing and PR. Why not that?
I mean, I suppose that's covered very well elsewhere. I think where we noticed a bit of a gap was this idea of two senior people chatting to each other. I think one of the heart of the Propeller as a PR company is we're very good at introducing people, getting conversations going, stimulating networks. So this was a kind of an extension of that. And I think whenever we found two people that had a chemistry together, which has been an enduring theme of the Dog and Bone, just in practice, they get chatting and joking and swapping anecdotes after 2 or 3 seconds or minutes, rather than half an hour that people need to warm up if they don't know each other. So that got things going quicker than if we'd taken another route, I suppose.
The other interesting thing that evolved in the format was that initially you were presenting. You were kind of the middleman. You were there moderating the conversation. And then I remember having a period where we sort of we phased that out, and you sort of came the other side of the glass, and then you've appeared back in as well. How have you judged when it's right for you to be in it and when you to step back?
I suppose I just got more big-headed as the 2 years went on, and decided I want to be heard on the podcast, that I had a role in starting. But no, I think what happened there was I was trying to conduct the conversation, or at least nudge, as you remember, behind the glass. This is sort of practical tips for, I suppose, others think of these sort of things. And just in practice, it is hard to get non-broadcast professionals to guide the conversation by speaking in their ear from time to time. They're just not really used to it, so they tend to stop talking, and that breaks the flow. So after a little while, I put myself into the conversation and tried to play that kind of linkman role between the two guests. In fact, there was one that we did, which was two very high-profile guests, the chief executive of the Financial Times and the chief executive of at the time of the Guardian Media Group. And Propeller does a lot in the media industry, so these are two big names for us. And actually, one of them asked me beforehand, would you please moderate? Because he just didn't feel comfortable being obliged to get the conversation going on his own. So that was the first one where I really got into the mix, and then I did a bit more of that going forward. Although it does change even now. We do change the format more on. I suppose worth saying here is the purpose of the podcast is, as Branwell mentioned, is to help us market ourselves as well as tell clients what we could do for them. But on the marketing of ourselves as a B2B agency, in a strange way, often the audience is actually the guests. So if I'm in a room for an hour and a half with the chief exec of the FT and The Guardian, that's pretty good sort of networking from Propeller's point of view. And obviously we'd love the listeners to be in the tens of thousands, but even if it's not, it's useful for Propeller to have that kind of ear of those people. So it means.
And take them to the pub afterwards.
Yeah, occasionally, yeah, or a chat in the corridor at least. But it just means that the format can kind of moderate to serve the overriding ambition of being a door opener in a kind of B2B circumstance, which is why we've done different formats, at conferences and events. I mean, Branwell, you can talk about what we've done there.
Yeah, with your encouragement, Neil, we did acquire some portable kit as well. And again, that's about a learning curve for us to go out and do on location recording at industry events, big conferences that happen every year. Cannes Lions, a big one for our industry, and Martin was out there with the portable kit. And in those kind of circumstances, it's very opportunist. You don't necessarily line up a guest, a week beforehand. It's who you might see in the bar that afternoon or at a conference session, and then you tap them up and ask if you can have half an hour of their time. So you get some immediacy, you get some vibrancy because the guests are kind of pretty energised when they're in that situation, and you get some very, very of the moment recording material, which you've listened to yourself because you've had to edit some of it. Which you may get the clinking of glasses in the background or the sound of fireworks going off or something. But for those particular live type recordings, they're kind of audio ambience, and add a bit to the flavour. But yeah, the ability to go portable and do things very quickly on the move at an event is an important weapon in the arsenal of creating podcasts for us.
Yes, hi, this is John Hegarty here. I'm at Adweek and I'm answering various questions here. And the first one is, what is the one thing you like and the one thing you dislike about industry events? The one thing I like about it is that I get to meet lots of other interesting people who are in the same world as me, trying to do great work. The thing I dislike, too much focus on one industry narrows the mind rather than expands on it. So that's the downside of being confronted by so many people talking about the same thing.
It's really interesting that though, because I think, as you say, Martin, you're not ignoring the listener, but you're using the podcast both in conferences and in the regular episodes. You're using it as a way to make connections with the guests, and you're using it as a mechanism to start conversations, aren't you? Rather than thinking about almost who's going to listen to it or what they will do as a result of listening to it.
Yeah, I mean, what they will do as a result of listening to it, is probably further in the back of the mind. I mean, obviously we want to create something listenable, and we've had some nice comments about how the senior guests firing off each other provides pretty good material. And we do have this, every regular Dog and Bone ends with this question, what's your most awkward or embarrassing business moment? Which usually throws up some pretty good sort of stories and anecdotes. But yeah, I think, reflecting on it, and perhaps the reason why the format has changed from time to time is been because for us as a B2B public relations content and business development agency, the most important role of the podcast is to help us grow and develop our own network. And both in the examples I gave of the people that come in the room, for example, we had Keith Weed, who is the Chief Global Marketing Officer for Unilever at the time, which was, a pretty big draw. We probably wouldn't have just been able to get him on the phone for a normal chat, but by positioning as a podcast where he shared his views with a couple of younger marketeers at the end of his long tenure with Unilever, we were able to create a piece of content that attracted him into our fold and got our awareness up with him, which was good. But if we have to bend the format to open the door in a different example, like a conference with 10 people in a bar where they just each give us 2 minutes what they reflect of a conference or something, then it serves that aim as well. And then when we're doing our own new business and development, we can put up the podcast, we can share the audio. And when we say we're good at developing networks and we can reach certain people, we have proof positive that we can.
Branwell, how have you got about getting those people? Because it is an impressive list. When I think of some of the people who've, you've had senior people from, as you say, Unilever, McDonald's, Google, loads of media agencies, Time Out, there's a huge list. And in many ways, it goes to show off who you can get. It shows off your network and your ability to speak to these people to the listener, because it's an impressive bunch of people. But how have you gone about that? Has that been a sort of labour-intensive process for you of setting up guests? Does it become a bit of a pain in the bum?
It has been labour-intensive. I'll take my hat off to Martin, because obviously Martin's got a very big contacts book, because Martin and I have both been in the business for many years in the marketing, around the marketing world. I was a journalist for many years. Martin was a journalist some time ago. And so we build up our contacts over the years, and a lot of our contacts have gained seniority throughout the years. So they will listen to us if we put a call in. Occasionally, we've reached out and tried a kind of cold call, and that does work. It's all in how you couch the invitation and how you sell the podcast guests you've had on previously, and showing the kind of status of the people you previously had on, because people like to be seen in a rich peer group. And it's worked so far, and it is hard work, and can be labour intensive, and you are chasing people around to coordinate dates and diaries, and occasionally things have been moved several times. But ultimately, if people want to do it, they'll get there and they'll find a way.
Yeah, I mean, I can just add to that, Neil. I think, on the original format, or the kind of core format of the two senior people in conversation with each other who already know each other, then you can get a kind of member get member type of thing. So if Branwell or I just know one of those two, we can ask and rely on them to bring the other one in, which is how we actually started. We had Rupert Howell, who was a main board director of Reach PLC at the time, and he knew Paul Pester, the chief exec of TSB, and suggested him as a guest. So it was from one we got the other. We didn't know both people necessarily at the same time. One of them brought in the other one, but it worked.
And do you manage to persuade most of those guests to promote the podcast when it comes out? Do you manage to get them to do social posts about it every time? That's
the aim. I mean, the amplification potential is huge if we can get there themselves, if they are on social media, and many CEOs and senior people are, there a few aren't these days. If we get them, their organisations, their own comms departments to get behind the podcast, that is the kind of holy grail, because the amplification can be huge on that kind of level if they tweet out and share on LinkedIn. I've gone so far myself as to kind of reach out to the publisher of someone who wrote a business book that we had on a podcast, and once I managed to nudge the publisher into action, they mobilised and tweeted out the fact there was a podcast featuring their author as well. So it's important to do that if you can get them motivated.
Why do you think we've invited you on today? Because you'll share it with your extreme networks. The process for us on this one is, from our point of view as a production company, it's one of the least labour-intensive jobs we do, because we really only record and edit. Is the second part of it, once we've done the recording, is that easier for you than the first part, or what's the process involved there at your end? Martin?
Well, I would answer that. I sort of reflected on it a little bit, actually, because yes, we are a little bit kind of control freakery on this, and I remember discussing it with you, Neil, and you said, Fresh Air doesn't have to do too much on the dog and bone. You're often clients oblige you or expect you to do more. And I suppose that other answer we gave, that for us, the dog and bone is as much about developing and opening doors within our network as it is the end listening experience. I suppose that may be the answer, because if you've got someone like a Keith Weed from Unilever and he's made some quotes, and we're looking at the script to see what goes in, I suppose, yes, we are quite keen to make sure that certain things we think are important to him get across. That's not to ruin the listener experience, but I suppose it's an extension. Our editing and our input into the final product is an extension of the dog and bone being part of our kind of network build.
One of the things we did after we'd been working with you for a while was to insert a little ad halfway through, literally like an ad break, Martin, that you sort of talk into and talk out of. Why did the messaging become that much more explicit?
Oh, actually, yeah, I think you gave us some good advice about trying to get reviews of the podcast to get more prominent on the iTunes store and other formats. So I think it's a question of trying to remind people to do a review. I would question how much it actually works in practice. It seems to me now that the way to get someone to do a review is to sort of send them the right link at the right moment when they're kind of online, and just to minimise the amount of buttons they have to press to get it. Just telling them to do it or asking them to do it doesn't seemed to work for me. But also because we do a lot of work in the advertising business, we thought it'd be quite good fun to have our own sort of little advert. But I think recently, to be absolutely honest, we haven't really got around to changing it. So if you think we should drop it, please let us know.
Yeah, I'll just add that there are, even in the small world of marketing, there are still quite a few marketing podcasts around, especially from the trade press. So you do want to make sure people remember where they heard that specific interview. If the editor of the Financial Times or the CEO is being interviewed on a number of different podcasts, you want to make sure people remember they heard that interview on your podcast. So I do think it's important myself to remind people where they're listening, what media property they're listening on.
Do you ever use it to refer back to? Do you ever use it as a sort of library of content that you can pull out because it's relevant at certain moments?
Yeah, we do. With the kind of journalist background I have, my antennae are up to spot opportunities when the content may be relevant again. Within Propeller, we do have a morning meeting where we look at the media, and I can then see if any of our guests are in the news for a reason, hopefully a positive reason in most cases, where they may have got a new job or got a new CEO job or launched a new business. And that's an opportunity to re-promote our podcasts with the appropriate framing, sentence around it, and hopefully just get a bit more attention and a bit more interest. And we will signal it to various journalists as well if we feel it's appropriate, if we think there's a story developing around a guest.
Brilliant. So, I mean, you've obviously kept it going for a long time now, and it's a sort of regular piece of Propeller's arsenal. How do you measure it to have been a success? What sort of value do you think it brings to you? Or is there a way of measuring it? Is it just instinct, really?
Well, I think given the point that it's a kind of as much a door opener and a network creator for us as an actual piece of broadcast content, the fact that the listener numbers are probably a bit lower than some of the things you've been involved in your career, but still, passable, is a less concern to us than the productions we've had and the doors we've opened through it. So, yeah, we judge it on the ability for it to be a calling card for Propeller and also what we can do for our clients. But Branwell will have a view on that as well.
Yeah, circle back to what we opened the conversation with about the reasons why we're doing Dog and Bone. It has demonstrated we can conceive of a podcast format and come up with good ideas and then execute. And we have done so for a client. We have created a podcast series, again, with your help for a client, if you recall. We had a specialist agency called Omo Bono produce a podcast series, so we've walked the walk now as well.
I'd also make the point that it's kind of got there's 30 people in the Propeller team, and it's kind of stimulated more interest throughout the team. I mean, we have another podcast now called Views on the News that Branwell oversees with members of his content team at Propeller Group, which is more kind of newsy and more kind of current affairs reaction, which brings in clients and contacts. So we had another one called a Brew with a View when we interviewed people. That was on video when they made a cup of tea. So it's kind of got the ball rolling within Propeller Group of what's possible with audio. So to that extent, it's also served a kind of internal encouragement purpose as well.
It's interesting because you mentioned the numbers and we talk about how you judge success. And of course, when we're talking about a branded podcast, one of the early questions that most people ask is how many people will listen. And the listeners to most podcasts are, I think, lower than people would expect. Podcasting is not a majority or mainstream listening route yet. And therefore, managing expectations is really important for people, but also just understanding what the benefits are. And I think, you guys have used the tool of podcasting and not got hung up on the numbers because you know that it's doing the right job for you. And that means that you're not continually, worried about how to push it further or how we're going to bring in lots more listeners. You sort of know that it's got an organic element to it anyway, but also that it's doing a much more sort of grown-up job for you than just trying to hit as many people as possible, which is great. It's a grown-up approach to it. When you look back on it now, anything you would have done differently? Any advice you would give to people who are looking to use podcasting in this way?
I would advise to sort of just get going and do something, because I think people sit on their hands kind of trying to work out the ideal format for too long. accept it's going to change and there'll be some mistakes, and that's just, it's like playing a game of tennis. You're going to hit a few in the net before you get your length right, and there's not a real problem there. We called it the Dog and Bone, which is a kind of interesting, catchy name. One of the disadvantages is it doesn't have any reference to Propeller in it. So from a kind of slightly branding, nerdy point of view, we're spending time developing a name that isn't a reflection of the Propeller brand name, but it's not the end of the world. But I think it's it's a consideration, and people should listen to advice from people like yourselves, because you explained things like Trint, which gives us the audio printout, better quality of microphones, things like that. So I think people just need to be open about it and listen to the advice, but overall just try something and see where it gets to, rather than hoping to build perfection. There's probably a lot of risk aversion out there, and you just have to go for it.
That's true of any creative project, isn't it? Have a go, see how it works, give it a try, and then you can change it and improve it as you go along. Branwell, any thoughts from you on how it's evolved and any advice you would give to others who are doing the same?
Just on coming at it with a kind of granular content editorial lens on, just things that we've noticed and things we've realised we should do. Check the morning's headlines if you've got guests on, in case there's a big financial story about the guests you're having on. It might be their results or something. But yeah, it's better that you know what mood they may be in. Make sure you know what the main talking points are going to be, but leave room for spontaneity as well. We have a kind of mantra that get it down on an A4 sheet, 8 questions possibly as a structure, but make sure there's room to manoeuvre and be flexible and not so rigid about the approach, and understand that people aren't necessarily always relaxed. As soon as they start, it can take people, I'm sure you know this yourself, a little while to relax into a podcast conversation. So, the initial 10 minutes might sound a little strained, but hopefully they will relax into it and it'll be more of an interesting conversation.
That's a great tip. The first 10 minutes of any conversation is largely the stuff that you cut out in the end, because once people have warmed up, that's where the interesting conversation happens, isn't it? Just to finish off, you've added this question at the end of every episode, which is, what's the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to you in your careers? So I'm going to turn it on you, Martin. What's the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to you in your career? I didn't even think about doing this before we started. Sorry.
No, you're very spontaneous, as you say, and we're well warmed up. Early in the Propeller history, we picked up a wondrous client. I was so happy to win. It was basically the ITV head office. We were the PR agency for the head office of ITV, not the operating companies, but the actual sort of head office, which is how they were working those days. And they, cut long story short, they went and hired a new first-off director of programming for the whole of ITV. So this person would be in charge in those days of Inspector Morse, Coronation Street, Prime Suspect. And we were the only PR company around that the press could speak to about this particular task. But as it happened, we weren't told who it would be. It wasn't in our remit. And I suppose the embarrassing moment and the mistake I made was I tried to perhaps use the fact that we were the PR agency for ITV headquarters as a little bit of a build with my press contacts, and maybe drop 1 or 2 hints too many that I might be the PR man who can help them out with this exclusive. And eventually they started sort of ringing me and texting me and saying, come on, Martin, when are we going to get this story? And I sent a message to the chief exec of ITV at the time saying, I've got all these press contacts on my back. Can we hurry up with the announcement, please? And I got this very terse message back saying, we'll do it on our own time. I don't really know who you are. Even the person you report to doesn't know anything about this. And we'll be taking our PR arrangements in-house pretty soon.
Oh, no.
So that was a real sort of sweaty, clammy-hammed moment, which I learned a hell of a lot about sort of flying a bit too close to the sun and managing expectations and all those lessons.
Branwell.
Just thinking back to a long career as a journalist, there's all kinds of scrapes and bumps along the way. Some time ago, I worked for a magazine, and I was meant to be flying to a conference in Orlando. Last minute dash as a journalist, I was doing things at last minute. Rushed off to the airport, approached the passport desk, pulled out the passport, and sorry, sir, this is the wrong airport for your flight. You're meant to be at Heathrow, not Gatwick. The cold, clammy fear that touches you as you realise you're not going to make your flight. And I did try. I got the connecting coach between Heathrow and Gatwick and was desperately willing it forward with every minute. And ran in. Too late. Missed the flight to what was a major conference and was too embarrassed to tell my then editor that I'd missed that flight. So I was a day late and out of pocket by the time I got there. But it remained a secret until this very moment.
Brilliant. Martin Loat, Chairman of Propeller Group, and Branwell Johnson, Director of Content for Propeller. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. To find out how Fresh Air might help you to create a fantastic podcast for your brand, please do get in touch. It's freshairproduction.co.uk. And in the meantime, I'm Neil Cowling. Thank you very much indeed for listening.
Fresh.